What is up, my dudes? Welcome back to another episode of Analyze the Pros. The game we have today is going to be Orange on the Shaman against Xeno on Priest. This is Orange's Shaman deck, running a one of Witchwood Piper in the middle. There's no Earth Shocks and there's no Plague of Murlocs in this list, or Hex or anything like that. So in terms of dealing with big minions from the Priest, it's only going to be able to do it via minion trades or via spell lackeys, essentially. On Xeno's side, he's running Priest. Actually, the exact same list that we've featured on this channel before. Pretty popular and standard variation of this deck right now. For the matchup, it is Priest favoured. Looking at mulligan win rates, we see Cleric Tolver right at the top yet again, as tends to be the case in pretty much any Priest matchup. And then you have a slew of 4 cards which are also fairly good as well. On the quest Shaman side, you're really looking mainly for a few cards. Mogu Fleshshaper is huge in the matchup, allowing you to essentially get a tempo swing back onto the Priest, and if you keep him off the board via Mogu tempo swing, you should be good to go. Totem again is pretty good as well, and then Questing Explorer as well is a bit further behind, as although it is a good card to have, it doesn't really trade well into anything from the Priest side other than a Beaming Psychic or a Light Warden. You're going to need additional help as well. So, mulligan time. For Orange, I think keep these two is fine. Although Questing wasn't the best win rate card, it was the third. And going first, just having a 2-drop, a solid one with Questing Explorer as well, is important. So it seems like a easy mulligan there. On Xeno's side, these 3 cards are pretty bad in the mulligan for the most part. Power Word Shield was quite high on the mulligan win rate, but I think without anything good to put it on just yet, it's not worth a keep on its own, and you probably should be tossing it looking for those Tolvirs and those Northshire Clerics. You can see a little bit of a difference here between the players. Orange really taking his time on this mulligan, writing stuff down, and Xeno doing things straight away. He looks a little bit nervous there, actually, I would say. So a little bit of a tell there, perhaps. That one player is a lot more comfortable in this spot than the other. Orange turn 1, pretty simple, Crop the Waters. Sludge Surfer obviously gets onto the board, but it blocks your turn 2 of the Questing Explorer. So you may as well just start going for the quest anyway. Okay, so before Xeno does his turn, we should talk about it. Tolvir, nice card. Nothing that can answer it on Orange's side. You do want to contest a totem, so coining the Tolvir will contest a totem, which is nice, and you can perhaps snowball a little bit by using a Beaming Psychic. While not the most mana efficient turn 2, it's probably good enough. You can either do that or just heal your Tolvir and it's probably fine. But I do like coining it just because it contests a totem, although your follow-up isn't super good. So Orange's turn 2. The most immediate, obvious play is just to play the Questing Explorer. The most mana efficient, doesn't die to the Tolvir. Maybe you can contest it a bit more next turn. Maybe you get a lucky lackey that helps you deal with this Tolvir. Obviously, there are a few downsides in that Tolvir can snowball a bit if there's something that comes down, like health buffs on it, or the full heal man. So let's talk about how good a Sludge Slurper is potentially here. We also have to look into the context of this Weaponized Wasp as well. Currently, for the Weaponized Wasp, if we want to get it active on turn 4, we need to have a lackey either alive on board or one available, and us having 4 mana when it comes to that 4 mana turn. If we go for the 2/3 here, and then follow up with Cable Wrap on the next turn, we can't play the lackey if we want to go for the Weaponized Wasp, because the lackey is just going to get killed off and the Wasp's not going to be available. If we go for Sludge Slurper on turn 3, we're going to get that Overload, and the lackey again is not going to be available. So in terms of getting the Wasp active on turn 4, it's pretty difficult if we go for a 2/3 here. Alternate lines is playing the Sludge Slurper on 1, plus the lackey, whatever Lackey you get. There's some good ones in this spot. And then maybe going for just the cable wrap on turn 3, and then you have Weaponized Wasp plus Lackey for turn 4, and you won't be playing this until like turn 5 or so, and you'll probably be developing worse stats onto the board on your turn 3, that's for sure, but you'll get this better turn 4. So there's a bit of upside to that. So how does that compare to just going for a 2-3 here? Well, the 2-3 draws you an extra card, so you might find something better to play. But in terms of board, you have a 2-3 on this turn. That's your turn 2. And then on the next board, maybe you'll have Cable Rat plus Lackey is probably the play you're going to go for, rather than Sludge Slurper, because Sludge Slurper is a bit mana inefficient on the next turn, and it overloads you for turn 4 as well. So it's probably going to be something like 1-1 plus Lackey on the next turn, and then we have a free turn 4, but we won't have a Lackey very often alive on our turn 4, I would say. So our turn 4 is looking a little bit awkward unless we can pick something else up from our deck. In terms of how we deal with this Tolvir, this 2-3 probably isn't enough to kill it on its own. We can get like a damage Lackey, but facing just a heal on this will be up to 5 health. And 2-3 plus 2 from damage Lackey is not enough to kill it either. So it's a little bit awkward in terms of getting through this Tolvir still if we go for this line. Alternatively, we can look at how Sludge Slurper does. So 2-1 here. Obviously this trade happens, but what Lackeys can we get? Ethereal Lackey is pretty bad, I'd say. One of the worst ones you can get. The spell's probably not going to help you. If you get something like a Bolt or a Zap, maybe that will help you out enough. Or something like Earth Shock. That could be good. But in terms of immediate tempo, just the Ethereal Lackey here is pretty bad. Damage Lackey will probably end up shooting it into this to be mana efficient. There is a bit of merit to holding it and not playing it here and just going for the 2-3 on the next turn into shoot plus wasp on turn 4. That's something you could do if you want to hold on to the Lackey for the wasp instead of playing Cable out on the next turn. Faceless Lackey is really good here, I would say. Getting the 1-1 plus a 2-drop might actually give you enough damage to get through this Tolvir on the following turn. If you get something just like a 2-3, then if they take this trade and full heal, then that's the worst thing they can do. But in terms of like a sidekick or a power word shield or just a heal, it's only got up to 5, and then you have the 5 damage available on board to trade into it, and maybe even get a value trade with this sometimes, and then just keep developing board. So Faceless Lackey, I'd say, is a pretty good win. Obviously there's RNG involved. You might end up with a 1 attack 2-drop or a 3 attack 2-drop as well. The Rush Lackey is pretty good, I would say, to turn this into a 3-1 to kill the Tolvir before they can snowball off it. And you're just left with a 1-1, and then maybe next turn you can play perhaps the Cable Rat to set up for your Wasp, or you could just go for the Questing Explorer. I think that's a pretty good result as well. So for Taunt Lackey, you play a 2-1 and it becomes a 2-3 Taunt. And you have a 1-1 on the board. And from Xeno's side, what plays can he do into this? If he doesn't have the full heal man, he'll probably not take this trade in order to protect his Tolvir and potentially snowball off it on the future turns. He's probably just going to health buff it and not attack, so you can't trade back into it, essentially. Because if you bump here and leave it as a 2-3, if you go for a health buff against a 2-1 and 1-1, then Orange is going to be more than happy to just kill this off. So unless you face the full heal man, where Xeno will bump into this and then full heal this guy up to a 2-6, and you'll have a 2-1 here and a 1-1, which is a pretty bad situation, I would say. But in that case, you can just drop the Cable Rat as a 1-1. And then on Xeno's turn 3, this 6 health guy is going to take a bit of damage. So you might be able to get through with a Wasp. And if you can't kill this, you might be able to Wasp his other minions and then try and set up a trade into the Tolvir instead. So I don't think that's too bad of a scenario, even when he has one of his best plays, which is fully healing the Tolvir. Evolve Lackey is pretty bad, I'd say. You end up with, likely, on average, not a good 2-drop. It could be like a 2-2. Is a pretty common stat line, which is pretty bad against a Tolvir. So in terms of keeping your Lackey around, it's going to be pretty bad. But then you can you can abandon it and go for the 2-3 on your turn 3, or just the cable wrap into the wasp again, and the wasp is going to allow you back onto the board in some form, because even if it can't kill the Tolver, if something like a cleric comes down, you can just shoot down the cleric and stop that card draw from Xeno, which is something valuable in its own. For the goods, look at that beautiful handwriting, guys. For the goods, we have damage, faceless, taunt, and rush. And for the bads, we have probably the spell lackey, although sometimes good if you get a decent spell, but usually going to be bad, and the evolve lackey. So 4 times out of 6 you're going to get a good lackey, I would say, if you go for the sludge, and you're going to potentially open the way for a wasp on turn 4. And in an unfavored matchup, I think taking this sort of approach is probably going to get you further ahead. If it does go wrong, it goes way worse for you than if you were to just play this, I would say. But if it goes right, it goes so much better. And if you're in an unfavored matchup where the priest has already coined one of their good early turns, I think it's worth taking a risk here. If you do just go for the 2-3 explorer here, your next turn's looking like just cable wrap plus a lackey, and it's not going to be enough to get through this Tolver. So you're likely just going to be facing down value trades from any minions that are developed behind this. If there's any 1-drops, they're going to be value trading either your cable wrap or the lackey that you get from the cable wrap, which is bad for you. You're not going to be able to get through this taunt from the lackeys here, and you're not going to have a lackey available for the wasp on the next turn. So it does seem pretty bad actually to your turn 3 a lot of the time, unless you get something good off the top of your deck. And again, you can't just go sludge plus cable wrap, because you're not going to have the mana available for the wasp on your turn 4. So I think, although playing on curve is normally something I really advocate because of the overload and because of the wasp in hand, and the fact that I say that 4 out of 6 of the lackeys are good results, and the other ones are sometimes okay in their own way if you high roll them a little bit, I think it's probably actually better to go for the sludge here, as weird as it is. In terms of Hearthstone fundamentals, you usually want to just play on curve and keep your turns flexible. You don't want to be spending 1 mana cards when you could be playing your full mana cost with dropping a minion. So it's certainly, in terms of fundamentals, it makes sense to play the Explorer, but I think if you break it down, especially within the context of activating this wasp, I think it is actually better not to Explorer here. But I certainly can't blame Orange for taking that route, because there's a lot to go through on that turn to come to that conclusion. Xeno's turn, he hasn't really got any choice, just play the cards available to him. It seems like a fine play. On Orange's side, it's a little bit awkward his hand. He can play this as a 3-3, and it doesn't get value traded at all here, and somewhat contest this, but you lose out on the potential swing from the battle cry later on. In terms of killing this Tolver, it's going to be a bit of a tall order for a while, so if something like a Divine Spirit comes down, you're pretty screwed in the at least immediate future. So it's probably a card you shouldn't be worried about right now, because it's so bad for you that it's going to be super hard to come back from it anyway. So you shouldn't be structuring your plays to play around a Divine Spirit, at least immediately. So how do we get to activate this wasp? Again, like we talked about before, if we want to be mana efficient this turn, it's something like Cable Wrap plus Lackey, or it's Cable Wrap plus the Sludge Slurper, and then you're overloaded on your turn 4, so you don't get to activate the wasp anyway. It's very likely that the Lackey you get from this Cable Wrap is going to be killed, unless you were to get specifically the Taunt Lackey to taunt up your Questing Explorer here. Something you could potentially do is just Cable Wrap plus a Lackey here as his turn, just develop onto the board. Maybe play a 4-drop next turn, or if something better comes along, play that. And then on turn 5, go Sludge plus the lackey plus the wasp, and that is going to be fine for a turn. It's a little bit slower getting onto the board, and you're giving the priest plenty of time to be able to snowball their things like cleric and stuff, but it's just something you gotta hope to dodge, I think, in this spot, in the context of this hand. So I think just cable rat plus the lackey here is good. If you get the taunt lackey, great, you can taunt this thing up and not attack, and then potentially activate this wasp on your turn 4. Okay, so which lackey picked up? Obviously great later on with a Mogu. We don't have a Mogu in hand. I think just the stat increase on the right here is good, so just take that. And you really don't want to overload onto the next turn. It's really looking like we're going for that 4-drop next turn into maybe wasp on 5. So the sludge is not going to come down until turn 5. So orange takes this bump here to reduce the 2-7 to a 2-5, potentially allowing him to get through it a little bit easier, and maybe restricting Xeno's turn a little bit because these 2 minions threaten to kill this 2-5. This trade now is opened up for Xeno if he wants to take it. He already had a good trade into this lackey, so it's not super bad for Orange's side that he's allowed this 1-for-1 trade into this 1-2, and it might actually be kind of a good thing because you can't actually do any trades into Xeno's minions while he has this taunt in the way. It's part of the reason why Tolvir is such an annoying card, is that you can't get value trades or 1-for-1 trades with any of the other priest's minions whilst this Tolvir's in the way. The bump limits the effects of Divine Spirit, which is still pretty good for Xeno, I would say, although in terms of mana efficiency it's not great on this turn, and certainly having a 2-10 instead of a 2-14 is way easier to deal with over a few turns, so certainly helps that you did this bump against that. Against Inner Fire, again, doing this bump means you're facing down a 5-5 rather than a 7-7, which is certainly good as well, although Inner Fire is likely not a play that Xeno's looking to do on these early turns. He's probably looking to try and stick his minions with stats on the health rather than the attack. So I think this is a good bump, essentially. Xeno's turn, and he has a few options here. The one he goes for, which seems very, very reasonable here, is going for the Ritualist, where he takes this trade first, and then takes this trade, and then Ritualists up his board. I've talked before about when you're playing this aggro priest deck, about this card's Psychopomp. How do you want to use this card? Well, you want to limit your pool ideally to things like this card and this card. That way you always get a really good result from the Psychopomp, or at least a high chance of getting so. So when we have the Tolvir and we have the Blade Master, we should be looking, how do I get value out of this Psychopomp? Because if I can have my thing die, and then for 4 mana develop a 3-1 plus a reborn full health version of the thing that just died, we should be doing that rather than using our other temple tools. So what happens if you Blade Master on this turn? You're not going to be healing any of your minions on this turn if you're going for Blade Master, so the Tolvir is likely going to die. You can prevent it from dying by taking this trade and taking this trade, and then Orange only has 3 attack on board against your 4 health Tolvir, which seems pretty good because if he doesn't kill it and you have a 4-3 Blade Master, then on the following turn you can full heal them both and be just super far ahead on board. So there's a huge upside to that. The problem of doing this trade and this trade is that you put this card in the pool of your Psychopomp, which isn't something you really want to be doing. You'd much rather not do that, ideally, because your next turn is looking like it's going to be Psychopomp unless both your minions survive. So if we can help it, we would much rather not take a 50-50 on this Psychopomp. So we'd rather keep this minion alive this turn if we can. And the best way to do that is to take this trade and this trade. Yes, we open up this trade back into our Tolvir, but we do want our Tolvir to kind of die on the next turn so we can res it with the Psychopomp. So what happens if there's no board interaction from Orange's side? As we know, there's limited amount from his deck. This trade happens, and then this trade will happen on the following turn. And the board state's going to look like this thing dead, this thing dead, this thing dead, this as a 1-1, and this as a 3-1, and we'll have a 4-3 Blade Master on board as well, which is pretty good, and Orange will have developed some stats as well. So on our turn 4, we can play a 3-1 Psychopomp plus the 2-6 Reborn Taunt on our side, which is great tempo, and then we can take this trade, which is a nice trade for us as well, which is great. We're very far ahead on board, and our hand is looking like an extra arms plus a Nephicet Ritualist, which we're going to be able to get super good value with the Ritualist on this 4-3 on the following turn, on our turn 5, and we're going to be able to extra arm something potentially to trade with it, and then Ritualist our guy up to full health. So that seems super good. We're not playing into MC Tech just yet either. How can Orange prevent that though? He has some ways to interact with board in his deck, namely Mogu Flesh Saper is one of them. If we take these trades and develop the Injured Blade Master, there's going to be 4 minions on board. So the Mogu can come down. So if a Mogu comes down to kill our 2-3 this turn, we're actually in pretty bad shape using this line, because they'd end up with a 3-2 Mogu at the very least, which they could potentially mutate, and then this 3-3 is going to value trade our Beaming Psychic, and we'd just be left with a 4-3 Injured Blade Master, or potentially the Tink Master might go into the Blade Master instead if Orange is a little bit worried about the Blade Master sticking around. If the Mogu was to come down this turn and kill our Tolvir instead of this killing the Tolvir, then this trade suddenly gets opened up as well, and we start falling pretty far behind on board. So that does seem a bit bad in leaving this thing on 3 health in that scenario. Other ways Orange could interact with the board would be the Sandstorm Elemental. We have a 1-1 here and a 2-3. The Sandstorm will take care of this 1-1, which is a little bit annoying for us, to be honest, because we're trying to go for this Psychopomp. And we'll end up with a 4-2 here against a 3-1 and a 2-2. And this will die, and this will die. So it looks pretty bad. What we could do is maybe trade Blade Master into here and then just Psychopomp, but we start looking a bit bad on board again. So extra arms on this turn actually looks pretty good. You could extra arms the Tolvir itself and take this trade, and then maybe trade into one of these to play around Mogu Flesh Saper a little bit. This is going to be a 4-4 against a 2-1, and you can have a 1-1 on your side of the board. So in terms of getting through this Tolvir, it's not actually going to happen from Orange. You're going to have 3 minions on board, and the only thing that Orange can do to kill it on this board is get a Lucky Lackey, which is a damage or rush Lackey into it, which I think you're probably fine with because you have the Psychopomp to res it on the next turn anyway. Or he has a Mogu Flesh Shaper, and the Mogu trades really poorly when you have a 4-4. You really don't want to be rushing in a 3-4 into it. So that does actually seem pretty good. I think your Tolvir is pretty safe as a 4-4 here. And if it does die, you can just Psychopomp it. It's not the worst thing in the world. But I think saving the Ritualist and playing more mana efficient here actually makes a ton of sense, because the turn 5 of just these two together is a huge amount of tempo that you don't really want to be giving up. If you Ritualist on this turn, you're isolating your Psychopomp because the Psychopomp isn't going to be able to res anything on the immediate following turn. Your Blade Master is just going to be a 4-3, and it's going to be hard to heal it up outside of a circle of healing. You're going to have to be using your hero power, which isn't very mana efficient. So although the Ritualist looks kind of good this turn, you get to value trade here, and then heal up to a 2-10. The 2-10 isn't actually much better on the board than a 4-4 is, to be honest, because there isn't any real direct damage coming from Orange on the next turn anyway. So you end up with a 4-4. Orange probably takes this bump into it to prevent this trade on the following turn. So this becomes a 4-2, and Orange will develop some form of stats. So you have two options. You can either go for immediate Ritualist to make this into a 4-12 and be super far ahead on board. Or you could just take the Psychopomp and have a 2-6 Reborn and then follow up with Injured Blademaster Ritualist on the following turn. The nice thing about this extra arm plays is that it plays around Orange's best sort of turns, which is with Mogu Flesh Shaper. By having a 4 attack Tolvir and not developing extra minions onto the board, you really limit the effect of Mogu. And once we start to snowball as the priest, the Mogu doesn't matter as much anymore. If we go for the Ritualist here and take a couple of trades and make a 2-10 and have a total of 4 minions on the board, the Mogu can come down and it can bump into this with a sort of value bump. It won't die on the backswing, and then potentially even a Mutate can come down. So in terms of playing around worst case scenario, bumping up this Tolvir into 4 attack is super important. So super complicated turn. I can't blame Xeno too hard for going for the Ritualist here. It's just a bit worse long term, and you don't really need to heal this Tolvir out by 7 this turn. You kind of almost want things to die. On Orange's side of the board, this 2-10 is looking pretty scary. If something like a Divine Spirit were to come down on the following turn, which could happen, you're looking like you're not getting through this taunt for an awfully long time. In terms of hand reads, I'd say it's unlikely Xeno has Inner Fire in hand. 1 mana was floated last turn, and Xeno had the potential to just leave this 2-1 on board and heal this up to 10 and make it a 10-10 and then just push face damage. Looking at our hand context, these two together make a really nice turn 5 if you want to go for that. So for this turn, I would just play mana efficient and just drop a 3-3. We know there's unlikely to be an Inner Fire in hand, so there's certainly potential that our 3-3 threatens to do a value style bump into this Tolvir on the next turn. Again, I think bumping's correct because Divine Spirit can ruin you in the future, and I don't think you're too sad if this trade ends up happening. I think you're okay with that. For Xeno's turn, we were bailed out a little bit by hitting this 1-drop off the top. Our turn was looking kind of awkward. We'd have to probably just do for an extra arms or a Blade Master on this turn and end up floating a bit of mana. The Psychopump's not looking very good here. In terms of the two, I think I prefer the extra arms. We're approaching kind of high amounts of minions on the board here, and we really want to start playing around Mogu a little bit better. So making our Tolvir into a higher attack seems great. It also stops this value bump on the following turn, which I like. So this turn, it seems like a nice trade into this 3-1. The downside of doing this is that our Psychopomp is going to get much worse towards the future as we start to kill off our small minions here, which is likely going to be the case to happen. So, as I talked about before, when you do have Psychopomp and Tolvir Blade Master in hand, you want to be looking to take advantage of the Psychopomp as quickly as possible by using this limited pool and take the advantage while you can, because later on it starts getting really awkward. In terms of what to do once you've extra arms here, take this trade, you have a 2-3 and you can Beaming Psychic your guy up to even larger health total, so it'll be a 4-11 here. Okay, so Xeno bumps into the 3-3. We've already established that there's no way for Orange to actually interact with boards. Like, he can't buff this Wasp outside of an Evolve Lackey, which is like, whatever. The only downside to killing his things is a Mogu Flesh Shaper, and Mogu Flesh Shaper isn't actually particularly good into a 4-8 right now. Yes, you make it 1 mana cheaper by leaving up this 3-3, but a 3-4 into this 4-11 that's going to be on this side of the board, it seems so bad that it's not something you should be playing around. Instead, I would rather push face damage, put him down to 24. You do have this Topsy in hand, so if Orange doesn't kill, it doesn't take the 3-3 into this 4-11 on the next turn. If you were to just draw Divine Spirit on the following turn, you'd have a 22 attack creature plus the 3 here, and that's your That's your 24 damage right there. So you actually set up a potential lethal out by going face here with the Topsy in hand. And it's likely that Orange might consider sending this 3-3 into your 4-8, into your 4-11 anyway, to play around things like Divine Spirit for the future. So to me, it seems like you've just wasted this attack to play around a Mogu a little bit, which isn't even good on this turn. Instead, just push the face damage while you can and start potentially threatening this topsy-turvy for a lethal in maybe not the next turn, but possibly on the next turn, but potentially within the future turns you're going to be looking to set up lethal. On Orange's turn, in terms of tempo, nothing looks great. I think we should probably stick to our game plan of going for these two things and wasping perhaps this Tolvir on this turn. We could also wasp this 2-3, but with an empty tech in hand we can make things awkward for Xeno on his following turns in terms of developing minions. Maybe he wants to put some minions on the board, but things get a little bit awkward in that sense. It's not 100% certain that we're actually going to get an empty tech off, but the threat of empty tech is enough to make your opponent's turns awkward. We are 4 out of 6 on our quest, so there is actually potential here to complete quest and then go for double battle cry on this on the next turn. It does require you to have 6 mana and a lackey available. So something you could do is MC Tech plus the cable route on this turn to generate the lackey and complete your quest. The downside is that you leave up this 4-8 with high health, so if something were to come down like Divine Spirit on the next turn, you might get blown out of the game, so it's something to consider. Also, by using the empty tech, you might encourage your opponent to start spreading wider on the board because they've already seen one of the MC techs. Although, in my experience, a lot of players still end up playing around the second MC tech, even when they've seen the first one. So what would happen in the case where you have a 3-3 and a 1-1 with a lackey and a wasp in hand? We know there's more arms from the opponent's side, so it's possible that Xeno will try and keep this Tolvir alive and maybe arms up his smaller guys to kill off your 3-3 and maybe kill off the rat as well. Maybe don't have to kill off the rat. But this thing's likely going to stick around with 8 health on the next turn, and that's still not going to be enough for the double Battlecry Wasp to kill it. And then you're still going to be facing down potential value trades from these minions onto your guys, and it's not going to be looking too great in that regard anyway. Plus you have the downside of a Divine Spirit on this thing blowing you out of the game as well. So I think even though the double Battlecry of the Wasp looks somewhat attractive on the next turn, it's not actually going to be very good. So instead, I think Orange does the correct play and just completes the quest with the lackeys here and weaponize Wasp, the biggest minion. If Xeno does get greedy with his value trades, like value trades here to keep his board alive, it opens up the potential swing turn with a Sandstorm Elemental in the future where you can use it to clean up these minions. So there is certainly downsides for him taking these value trades and potentially a window for you back into the game as well. So although they do look pretty juicy, they're not always going to work out super well for Xeno. Overall, I think I agree with Orange's decision making this turn. So Xeno's turn, and things are starting to look a little bit awkward. We have 2 slow cards in the Psychopomp and the Blademaster, and the Psychopomp has a really bad res pool as well. Something like Blademaster heal this turn is, okay, but we're starting to kind of reach board parity when we should be very far ahead. But Orange has the quest up, which is going to allow him to really put a lot of stats onto the board soon. So we are starting to find the game pull away from us here. So if you watched my video analysing some Priest gameplay last week, we saw Muzzy in a very similar spot where he had Tolvir, Blademaster, Psychopomp available, but he held them in hand for a long time instead of trying to get value out of them. These two cards have such synergy with the Psychopomp. It's a massive shame to let this sort of thing happen, where you do somewhat reasonable plays each turn, which they did look like from Xeno's perspective. But in terms of hand context and overall game plan that you end up with, you start getting towards these awkward turns. And the payoff for those reasonable turns earlier just isn't good enough for the long-term value compared to this Psychopomp res strategy where you're making the most out of every card in your hand. Things are looking a little bit awkward. Currently, our res pool is just a Beaming Psychic, not this one, but one that already died. So Psychopomp here looks pretty bad. You also don't want to get into MC Tech range if you can afford not to. For me, I think the best way to get a bit of long-term value this game is through the Psychopomp, getting a good res. And the best ones are obviously these two minions. So let's look towards doing that. We also need to play around MC Tech a little bit. We already know there's not great direct damage from Orange's deck. The best things are Sandstorm and Mogu's, essentially, and maybe another Wasp. But that's about it. It's likely just going to be developing stats onto the board for the most part. Something you could do this turn is More Arms, your Tolvir, and push face damage. We have a Topsy in hand. We're slowly losing value. The rest of our plays are looking pretty bad. The quest is completed for Orange, so in terms of longevity for this game, we really kind of need to speed it up and try and win where we can. And likely going face is the best strategy. If we buff up our Tolvir to 6 attack and at least 7 health and take some trades, there's not actually a way for Orange to get through it outside of direct damage from hand, and we already established before there isn't too much of that in the deck. Alternatively, if we want to set up longer term damage, we can develop the Blademaster here as a 4-3 or potentially a 4-5 if we want to heal it, and then take some trades. We want to probably kill off this minion in that case because we want to play around an MC Tech. Go for a 4-3 here, maybe heal this to 7 and take this trade. With a 4-3 and a 4-7, these two minions aren't actually doing anything on the board. The best they can do is trade into here and put it down to 2 health, and then maybe a Sandstorm comes down on the opposing turn to clean up the board, and that is pretty bad. But outside of that, if there is no Sandstorm in hand and you have this as a 4-7, these two minions, although they're still alive, they're really not actually doing anything in terms of board control. And you're going to have 4 attack, 2 attack, and another 4 attack on the next turn, which is 10 attack, plus some more arms in hand, plus you're going to be pushing the 4 here. So you're potentially putting the Shaman down to around 10 health on the end of your following turn, which is getting towards a win condition there, I would say. So yeah, Xeno kind of does the exact opposite of what I would suggest on this turn, is where he trades into absolutely everything that Orange has, and there's really no reason to. If you studied Orange's deck list, the only reason you need to trade is because of Mogu. They don't have anything that buff their minions' attack. There's no Flame Tongue, there's no Bloodlust or anything like that. There isn't any hard removal either, so you won't get punished for leaving up a big minion from, say, a Hex or an Earthshock or something like that. So in this situation on board, all these trades are completely unnecessary. I wouldn't say all, maybe this one's fine, but the other ones seem fairly unnecessary because your taunt is protecting all your other minions. Like, these are all protected because of the taunt. Orange has to get through the taunt first, and your taunt's got enough health that there isn't enough attack on board to get through it anyway. So all these attacks should be going face, and I don't think you should be extra armsing here. I think it's better to develop the Blademaster for better damage over a few turns, because you get to put the 4 on board initially, and then you'll have that 2 extra charge damage from the extra arms in hand regardless. And you can see that we've missed We missed 4 damage to face earlier, which was very, very free, I would say. And we've missed, I'd say, at least another 8 here, and potentially even more long term by developing the Blade Master. And the Shaman is still on 28 health. So we are going for a route where we have to win on board against the Quest Shaman. And by allowing the Shaman basically as much time as they want, because they're not worried about dying at this point, all they're worried about is board. They can do as greedy plays as they want to on the following turns and not be worried about their health total at all, because you've given them that window of opportunity just because you're doing the trades for them. In other words, SM Orc. For Orange's turn, as we've seen, maybe I talked about it a little bit before, the value trades from these 2 minions actually open up the window for this, because currently Orange had no access to damaging the minions behind the taunt. He had to sink all his damage into this taunt, and the ones behind are protected depending on how you want to trade them. So after these trades, this card Sandstorm Elemental suddenly looks really, really nice. And I think this turn, although it doesn't seem great, damaging this by 2 and killing off both of these minions is really good in terms of board control. And it's going to buy you a ton of time going forward. I think even though it's a bit mana inefficient here, just you have a pretty limited window of opportunity to kill this 4-2 before things like Circle come down or just heals, because you're not going to be able to get through this taunt immediately. So I think take it while you can and just do a Sandstorm Elemental with the double hero power here, and it'll be very good. Back to Xeno's turn, and we have another Psycho Pump in hand, which is a terrible draw. And sorry to repeat myself so much, but when you're playing Priest and you have Psycho Pump Blade Masters in hand, really try to look towards doing that, because it's just going to make the rest of your turn so much easier, so much flexible, and you're not going to be in these situations where you have an extremely powerful card in Psycho Pump and it's absolutely crap in this scenario because your res pools are so rubbish by this point. For what we want to do this turn, I think if we look at our mana curve, our next turn's looking like a 4 plus a 3 together. So we should probably just cash in our Psycho Pump now on this turn and look for a mana efficient next turn. If we were to pick up something like a Circle of Healing and this doesn't die here, then we have a potentially huge tempo turn 7 with the Blade Master Circle healing up our Tolvir as well, and maybe even dropping the Psycho Pump if we want to do that. Again, against Shaman, sometimes you do want to kill this minion because the threat of them bouncing it with a Bulk Slosher is quite a lot. But at least in the immediate terms, Orange only has 6 mana on his next turn, so he can't do something like double Battlecry, bounce this, and then replay it on at least on the same turn. But I think in this scenario where you're running out of resources and this Topsy is looking really, really bad for you, you want to be pushing face damage just to go for that out of winning. If you're going to win this game against a completed quest for Orange, you do need to start pushing face damage, and you should have started quite a while ago. And yeah, pretty bad res from the Psycho Pump. And again, we're seeing more trades. It's just, this Priest deck is an aggro deck. You do need to try and kill him at some point. Few options. Barista initially is okay. You get the sludge back to your hand and you develop a 4/5. That's fine. I think you probably want to make use of this Cable Rat here though. Double on the Cable Rat. If you hit to the damage Lackey, it's just so insane on this thing. Even something like a Rush Lackey is really good. Faceless Lackey again, super good. And then you should be fine going forward. It's not like Xeno can spread super wide on board because you have this MC Tech as a punish. So just for the payoff, I think going for the Cable Rat here makes a ton of sense because there's 2 good Lackeys which are both very, very strong on this board. Doesn't hit them, unfortunately, but even though we've got kind of a low roll, it doesn't actually matter too much. We still get a pretty good result, getting to evolve our Rat here and play a bunch of stats onto the board. A little bit weak to Pyro in this spot, kind of. Not a bad taunt to evolve into. The only question now is whether you want to take this bump or not. The main thing to worry about is Wild Pyromancer, I would say. It's possible Xeno has it in hand. There wasn't that great turns for it in the past, but here it's looking pretty nice. Something that could happen is this trade into the shield happens. This trade to make this onto a 1 health. And then a Pyro plus a spell and die happens. And that's actually pretty bad tempo for you on the Shaman side. The upside to leaving this alive is that you get potentially a better Barista on the next turn. I would say Pyro is fairly bad for you. How much better is it if you take this bump? This goes down to a 4-1. So Xeno might have to just heal this before he Pyros, and then it'll be a 4-2 afterwards. If he does Pyro plus 1 spell, which is probably all he needs to do. And then maybe you can take this trade afterwards and you'll be left with no minions against a 4-1 and a 3-1 Pyro. Not actually that bad for you, to be honest. If you don't take this bump and the Pyro happens, well, this just goes up to a 4-3 instead. So the Tolva doesn't actually die whether or not you Pyro. It just loses a bit of health if you do this bump. So I can get behind Orange and not doing the bump, just because Barista gets a lot better if you leave this 2-1 alive. Things to consider, I guess. Orange may also have the read that there's no Pyromancer in hand, based on plays that have already happened. So Xeno's turn and things are pretty awkward. Given that we have a very minion heavy hand, playing around MC Tech this turn tends to be impossible unless we want to float a bunch of mana. And we're not so far ahead on board that we can afford to play around it, I think. So if I was Xeno, I would probably end up dropping both the Blade Masters or something. Maybe save the Cycle Pump just to try and get a better res pool on the following turn, because this thing's not dying. And maybe your Blade Master ends up dying next turn as well, so you have a better tempo turn on the following turn where you're going to be floating mana anyway. So I think it's better not to Cycle Pump now and just wait for it on the turn after, where you might end up rezzing this Tolva or one of your Blade Masters, because one of them is going to end up dying on the following turn. And your res pool right now is absolutely garbage. There's a bunch of beaming sidekicks, so I'd rather give myself a chance for a high roll than take a low roll now while we're in a bad spot. But yeah, this empty tech is just gonna, even if it takes these smaller creatures, it's gonna be enough value to pull Orange ahead and win the game here, I think. And the rest of the game really is clean up. After the Blade Master's been stolen, the trades are just too good on board. So it looks like Orange just takes the win here very comfortably. I think solid gameplay from Orange, I think. Although I think the second turn had a bit of merit for taking the Sludge Slurper line. Orange line by no means was bad, and considering all the lackeys and all that stuff on your turn 2 is a bit too much to ask when Hearthstone fundamentals pretty much tell you to play the 2-3 there. But it's something worth considering. The Sludge Slurper line had a bunch of merits as well, but overall I think Orange played pretty well this game. Xeno, on the other hand, I think he was a bit too focused on trading. He didn't recognize that the Shaman deck doesn't really have great ways to buff damage. It's pretty much always going to be sinking damage into your taunt through minions on board, so you don't actually have to do the trades for them. And Orange would be worried about things like Divine Spirit coming down anyway, so it's likely he's going to try and bump away the health of your taunt regardless. So you should take advantage of that and just push face damage with it and make Orange do the trades himself. Again, this is another Priest game where we ended up in a spot where we had Blade Masters and Psycho Pumps in hand. We had a Tolva on board that hadn't died, and those cards just kept getting stuck in hand. We were choosing to do more immediate tempo plays and then the quality of our hand overall just started getting way worse, and by the end of the game we just had a bunch of minion stats which were rezzing like 1-2s, and we were playing 4-3s, and we ended up having to play into an MC tech, which was really bad for us. When you're playing this combo priest deck, really look at the context of your hand going forward, and if you can try and get good stuff into your res pool and play a Psycho Pump, it's one of the most powerful things you can do in that deck. And then you can just snowball that advantage with the things like extra arms, with your health buffs, that sort of thing, afterwards, and you're going to be ending up in a much better spot. Could have been a game where Orange's experience in tournaments certainly helped him out. Xeno looked a fair bit more nervous than Orange during this game, and I think the play kind of showed that as well. Taking too many safe lines here and there, way too many value trades as well. Yeah, GG Orange. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. I'll be doing more of these next week. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe, all that jazz, and I'll see you in the next